Just even in my life, I tried to just do everything the most efficient way possible.
Because the key now is like you've got to that level, and that's awesome. Let's keep you here.
In Counter-Strike, so many of the things are in the timing, right? Sometimes 1 second is way too much.
Because I feel like some of my persona in Counter-Strike changed who I was as a person.
Oh, what? Jumping double for gold!
Getting the advantage is basically the single most important thing as a competitor in any discipline that is known to man. We have to work out how to get the advantage. Now, to get the advantage, we have to understand where the value is. And to understand where the value is, we have to be able to analyze the situation. And we have to use the tools that are available to us to find out what these answers may be. And then we have to incorporate our understanding, our newfound understanding, into our gameplay. But it can be very difficult to get this understanding. And, this is, I suppose if I was to use a comparable scenario, it's like two gladiators that are placed in an arena together. It's how do we, figure out who's got the edge? Well, we can't necessarily know certain things. Like we can't necessarily know the combat experience of these two fighters. We can't necessarily know how their approaches, if they're carrying injuries. There's a lot of stuff that we can't necessarily know. What we can know is, what is the environment? Is it sandy? Are there rocks on the ground? Is there a lot of loose kind of dirt on the ground? And what kind of armor are they wearing each? Is it armor that's more susceptible to being stabbed or slashed, or is it going to be more effective to use a blunt weapon? What weapons are they carrying? What kind of fighting style may they use with the weapons that they have at their disposal? What kind of person do they look like? What kind of habits do you think that they may have? What kind of stance are they using currently? That might tell you their intentions. Where might you find openings based off of some of this information that you have? Which direction is the sun right now? Who's standing with their face to the sun? All of these things can impact this fight that's about to happen. And, there's many more, small things that you can start to think about that may actually contribute to the decisions you may want to make as one of the fighters. And it's exactly the same way in any esports title. In a game of Counter-Strike, there are fundamental principles at play that impacts how you make decisions, how you know what a good peak is. So to know what a good peak is, you need to know how the mechanics work in terms of the peaking, right? So we know that distance advantage is universally a thing. You can't really get around it. It's something that exists in real life. It exists in the video game. It is just how vision works. So if you're closer to an angle and the opponent is further away, that opponent has the advantage in this case. We know that there's, right eye peak, that the camera is placed in the head of the model, but slightly to the right eye, which means that the person who is swinging from the right might be able to see you first if you're in a left eye peak. So now we've started to understand a way to look at angles and to look at peaks, whereby we can actually say with great consistency what a good angle is, what a good peak is. We can figure that out now. There are other things that may play into this, and I don't want to go too deep into the weeds on naming all of the mechanics and how you might want to make decisions, whether it's like a jiggle peak or whether it's what kind of situation you're in, the context, and what positions they're in. And there's so many different things that can impact how you might want to peak an opponent and how you will execute it. But ultimately, the idea is that you need to first nail down what the fundamentals mechanics are that are present within the game are, given that, for example, here we want to understand how to frag people. That's kind of what the chief concern is when we're thinking about peaking. But when we're thinking about other things that can maybe contribute to winning a round, we have to kind of look at the situation and just, if we start to study demos, we might start to realize that there are some universally applicable concepts that work game to game, even for games that have different game modes. For example, positioning. We know that positioning is actually important. And if maybe you actually already knew this because maybe you watched a martial arts fight and you heard a commentator talk about positioning and how important positioning is, or maybe you played a different game, maybe you played Quake or StarCraft or a fighting game, and you learned about footsies in that fighting game and spacing, or you learned about positioning, high ground positioning in Quake, or you learned about resources in Quake or StarCraft. All these concepts are actually fundamental principles that actually go and apply across different games. So once you start to be able to break down a game into its constituent parts, and you start to be able to kind of more broadly understand how to name these different ideas that can serve to break down all of the elements that play within a game and within the flow of a round or a match, you can start to understand the specific dynamics behind certain principles there. So for example, with positioning, we can understand that, let's say in Quake, you're going to have an advantage if you have the high ground. This seems kind of like a universal concept in real life as well. We know that, any battle strategy will revolve around having the high ground if you possibly can. And that's going to be extremely favorable because of the troops having to travel up the hill. They're going to be encumbered by the additional effort that is required to get up that hill. So they'll be not only slower, but more tired and so on and so forth. And so this is a great way to mitigate a lack of numbers in the fight, is by choosing a more tactically favorable position. Similarly, you can look at StarCraft and see this principle in play as well. In StarCraft, you can have a much worse, potentially a composition, but as long as you use it more effectively from a positional standpoint, or you attack the right units, or you spread out your units in the correct way, or you use the terrain to your advantage in this way, maybe in a more complex manner, but just generally with better positioning, you're going to have a better result as well. So if we look at a game of Counter-Strike, we know that positioning is also critical. Not only just in having, as we mentioned previously, having the better angles, but also creating a situation where your team has maybe more information. And we understand as well that positioning can give information. That is also a really, really big deal, because we understand that another thing that's important, another currency within a game like Counter-Strike, is information. This is something that also exists in all of the other games. Like in Quake, it exists, but functions maybe in a different manner. In StarCraft, it definitely exists, or any RTS, it exists because you have fog of war. You don't have perfect information. So you need to have information of certain key factors to understand how to make your decisions. In the terms of, if you look at fighting games, you do actually have perfect information in the fighting game, so it's not necessarily as applicable. But in Counter-Strike, it is certainly a currency, and as it is in Valorant or Rainbow Six or any other tactical FPS as well, it's an important resource to be used. And so with positioning, you can understand, okay, maybe I can get better angles, but what are other things I can get from positioning, that can help me get to the objective? And you can kind of work things backwards if a little bit, reverse engineer things. If a team wins a round, how did they do it? Did they do it by defaulting and taking a lot of map control? How did that positioning, how did that map control impact their chances to win the round? What options did it give them? What position did it put their opponents in terms of, what did it take away from their opponents? Because if you're gaining ground, if you're gaining map control, your opponent's losing that. So they're losing something. And this will move into my next idea, which, and again, I don't want to go too deep into the weeds on any one concept, but I just want to show that there are always these greater concepts at play that exist in every single game. So you can look at this as an investment as well. You're a team that gained map control, likely invested for it. I hope so, at least, because you should never get anything for free. This is, by the way, perhaps one of the most important principles in video games. You should never give away anything for free, and you should always get a positive and efficient resource value exchange on an exchange. So, for example, when you're throwing a flashbang, you need to make sure that flashbang actually served a purpose. You invested money, you invested economy into that piece of utility. So is that flashbang going to help pop flash your teammate in to take a position or make a play safe? Or is it to get information? Or is it to suggest that you're doing a play that you're actually not, and to create presence? What is that flashbang for? It needs to be for something. It can't just be for no reason. We understand the concept of trading because trading is a concept that actually is interconnected between the idea of investing resources as well as information, as well as positioning. Because if we think, what is trading really? Well, trading is just effectively the idea that if I invest myself to try to take a position and I have a risk of my life as a player in this round, let's say that risk comes to a fruition that I actually die, then can we allow that to go for free? Because we probably didn't just invest me as a player. Maybe we invest in some utility as well to take this position. So you don't want to allow this trade to go on. So you don't want to allow this kill to go unanswered, because if that is the case, what you have effectively done is you've created an investment where your return is nothing. You'd never want to have a return on investment that is nothing. This is not a business class. That's just an obvious fact of life. You want to invest something and get something back. It is an acceptable investment if the investment is lost, let's say in a player, if you get a trade in and you have actually managed to make good on that initial play that you were looking for, which was to take that position, to get that entry kill, to gain the ground that gives you more advantages and gets you closer to your objective. Same thing with looking at pretty much any resource. Everything is a resource to some extent that exists, and everything should be for something. And you should always be looking to get a better deal than your opponent. That's the general idea. This is something that I love to talk about when we are looking at Inferno. Inferno has a really good example of this, often with the ways that the utility battle works, because it's a very utility-driven map. Because of the way that the choke points are, smoke grenades become very strong. So it therefore is extremely strong for the CTs to be able to hold on to utility until very, very late into the round. Because of how difficult the choke points are to move through, it means that the smoke grenades make it even more difficult for the opponents, for the attackers, for the Ts to actually get to their objective. So if they can find a world where they can hold on to that utility for a very long time, they're getting themselves into a position where they're much more likely to get to their objective of defending the bomb sites. Whereas for you, you're making your life really difficult. Your life's made much easier to get through these choke points. However, if you're able to not only pressure away the utility of the CTs, but you're also able to maintain enough utility yourself that you've now created a utility disparity and advantage that you can maybe still run a set piece, and they have no counter utility to slow you down or to hinder you with flashes or molotovs and delay your timings and so on. So this exchange is really important, and it's super important not to have inefficient exchanges. So these are some ideas as to how you can start to maybe understand what's really at play when you're looking to find the advantage, when you're looking to figure out where is the value. Think about some of the bigger concepts. Try to boil things down into bigger concepts and see which concepts kind of contribute to one another. And once you start to build this framework, everything starts to make a lot more sense, and you're able to discard a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense or is useless data. So there you go. There's a 12-minute discussion about some ways in which you can understand how to find advantage and understand how to analyze things, so you can start to really work out how things actually come together in terms of all of the intermingling concepts and interconnected ideas that allow you to be a better player and a better team and to get closer to your objective.